In an earlier video of mine, I had alluded to my association with the global transportation industry. And in a very recent YouTube community post, I had put up a photo in which I was transiting the Suez Canal while serving aboard a merchant ship. Now with that, it must be amply clear that I am part of the maritime or shipping industry. Yes, I am a seafarer, a master mariner. In that very post, one of you asked me to talk about the Ever Given incident where the vessel got stranded in the Suez Canal, blocking one of the major sea lanes. Yes, stranded is the right word. She ran aground and then got stranded. The difference between simply running aground, and there's nothing simple about running aground, but simply running aground versus being stranded is that when the vessel cannot refloat with the tide, it is effectively stranded and it needs to be pulled out by force, perhaps sometimes by jettisoning cargo or a combination of all those. The vessel has now been successfully refloated and she is now underway. But as soon as the incident happened, armchair experts across the world started passing judgments on what went wrong, how it happened, and as usual, the easy targets, the seafarers, were pronounced guilty. Then of course, we've got memes like this floating around on the internet. I find them to be in poor taste, and I would take this opportunity to ask you, when was the last time we shared and enjoyed memes of this sort about an air crash? As someone who has presided over and led investigations for many maritime incidents, including fatalities, loss of limb, fires, collisions, elisions, there are two things I would like to say. Number one, the causes of this incident would only be revealed after a very thorough and comprehensive investigation, which could very easily take a couple of months to conclude. Secondly, and more importantly, if the results of the investigation point towards the failure of the human element as causal or as the basic or the root cause of the incident, that investigation would have been done by an amateur, because the basic or the root cause of an incident is always a failure of systems and never the human element. Now, while the contributory factors to this incident could be many, including equipment failure, the bank effect, the wind or the currents catching the vessel broad on, because she does have a very, very deep draft and a large windage area. So after that, there is precious little that the ship's crew can do. Or it could be navigational error, it could be poor advice by the pilots, the canal pilots, it could be crew fatigue, it could be pure crew negligence, it could be a combination of any or all of these. Notwithstanding that, we still need to wait for the investigation to be concluded before we start taking cheap shots at the poor seafarer who can't defend him or herself. Now, that being said, this incident should be seen as a canary in the proverbial coal mine. Ship owners, underwriters, charterers, and all other stakeholders, canal operators, all of them should come together, take a step back, and evaluate whether the transit of such large container ships through the canal in its present form is a risk that is worth taking, because the liabilities involved are enormous, to say the least, and listing them out would deserve a video of its own. People not associated rarely give a thought about the maritime or shipping industry until, of course, it makes the headlines. And almost every time it makes the headlines, it does so for the wrong reasons. For example, in this case, or in the case of the Wakashio last year, where the vessel ran aground off the coast of Mauritius, leading to an oil spill, or the Exxon Valdez, going back all the way to 1912 to the Titanic sinking. And if not these incidents, people associate the industry with being a major polluter, a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Indeed, rightly so, because shipping accounts for around 2% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. But what they conveniently are oblivious to is the fact that shipping also carries over 90% of world trade. Let's put that in perspective. 2% of the air pollution whilst carrying 90% of the trade. Let that sink in. Respect. Not just that, the industry has set upon itself very lofty and ambitious goals to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions in comparison to the 2008 figures by 40% in less than 10 years from now, in 2030. And by 2050, they want to bring it down by 50%, going down all the way to zero before the turn of the century. You, dear viewers, perhaps have never heard of all this, because if there is one thing that our industry sucks at, pardon my French, it is at promoting itself. We suck at PR, and that is why you may not fully appreciate how much we impact your lives. I'm not exaggerating here. Take a look around you. The odds are most of the things that you see around you in a radius of 10 feet where you are right now has been impacted or touched by this industry. It's been moved by sea, either it or parts of it. If you're watching this video on a smartphone or a tablet or a computer, there are very good chances that either the entire device or components of it have been shipped to where you are by sea. It's the same for the clothes we wear, the shoes we wear, the breakfast cereal we eat, the furniture that we sit on, the cars or the public transport we take to get around, or the fuel that they use. They've all been transported in part or in whole by sea. Imagine how much your average fast food burger would cost to make if everything were to be sourced from right where you are. Everything from wheat to make the buns or the bread, the vegetables, the meat, to the ingredients in the sauces, the ingredients that go into making the cheese, the utensils and the equipment that you cook the burger in, the raw material that is used to make those utensils, all that is shipped across the world via the seaborne trade. Indeed, the life where these erstwhile luxuries are today a matter of fact for us that we take for granted is all thanks to seaborne trade. And for all this, if there is one community of people we must all thank, it is the seafarers, who are the lifeblood for seaborne trade. The professionally qualified individuals who are rightly described as jacks of all trades and masters of most. Purely by virtue of being a seafarer, one could be an expert in welding, paintwork, plumbing, and at the same time could engage with you in a detailed discussion on calculus, fluid mechanics, navigational astronomy, or maritime law. In all probability, they could order a beer in 4 different world languages and share with you their tales out of their experience of having visited over 100 countries where the average landlubber might struggle to name 50. Yet, these talented and dedicated women and men are seldom heard of and silently go about doing their work, many times on tours of duty of 11 months at a stretch. All this said, there is a very, very dark side to this industry, to seafaring, that I hope to share with you today. Hello and welcome to Sarvatra. How many of you, my dear viewers, have heard of something called the crew change crisis? Yes, it is real, and it is a real humanitarian crisis that is at this moment ongoing. As the world woke up to this awful pandemic early last year, seafarers were, as they still are, at the forefront of ensuring that much needed medicines and medical supplies were provided and were available where they were needed. They worked around the clock, taking supplies around the world, ensuring that global trade doesn't stop, and thereby alleviating the world's suffering through this pandemic. But despite their good and undying efforts, they were not considered essential or key workers. Once seafarers complete their tours of duty, they're usually relieved at convenient ports that are usually closer to international airports. So what happens is that the reliever is transported to this port from his or her country of origin, and the seafarer who has to be relieved is repatriated through that port. However, as the pandemic started spreading, countries started restricting the movement of people apart from essential workers through their ports and airports. They weren't allowed to transit anymore. Consequentially, seafarers who had completed their tours of duty were now not allowed to get off their ships and disembark. In certain cases, they were on board for over 14 months. Births of children were missed. Deaths of loved ones were missed. There was a case I know of where a seafarer died on board a ship, and despite his death having nothing to do with the virus, repatriating his body back home became a major diplomatic challenge. At its greatest extent last year, the crew change crisis saw around 500,000 seafarers stranded. This number has since come down to around 200,000 now, as countries have started recognizing seafarers as essential or key workers. At this moment, around 50 countries give them this much-deserved recognition. There have been unfortunate cases where the local population in the ports and airports that are used as transit hubs for seafarers have wrongly accused seafarers of being the source of higher rates of infection in their cities and ports, and have pushed their local governments to restrict their movements. Yet, despite all this, seafarers continue serving on board the ships, bringing us the much needed supplies that we require, because they are one of the most conscientious of professionals. Sadly for us seafarers, we do not form a significant political constituency or a vote bank anywhere in this world, so our voices are seldom heard, and when they are, they're fragmented. Through this video, I want to make an appeal to all of you to please take a moment to acknowledge the sacrifices of the seafarers and how their continual contributions are impacting our lives positively every day. I rarely do this, but I would request all of you to please share this message far and wide so that everyone knows what you have found out today. I would also take this opportunity to ask you to go and subscribe to the channel of Karanveer Singh Nayyar, who is a seafarer and a very passionate one at that. He makes some lovely videos on various topics, including seafaring, nautical and maritime topics. So please do go and visit his channel and subscribe to him. Those of you who may be watching from India may not be aware of how Indians under the British East India Company played a very crucial role during the Opium Wars in establishing Hong Kong as a maritime center that it is today. If you're a fan of history like me, and when travel permits, if you find yourself in Hong Kong, do pay a visit to the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. I would like to give a special thanks to the museum for allowing me to film this video in their premises today. As you can see, behind me is a model of the OOCL Hong Kong. This ship is similar to the Ever Given that ran aground and got stranded in the Suez. It's a 21,000 TEU container ship, so it can carry about 21,000 20-foot containers. It is one of the many exhibits here in the museum. The museum is a non-profit educational institution funded by the international shipping community and the government of Hong Kong. In this museum, you can get some of the most breathtaking views of the Hong Kong harbour and its skyline. The gallery spaces here are filled with some of Hong Kong's most interesting cultural heritage items and articles. The themes explored include China's maritime heritage, the Canton trade, the Pirate Coast, the Hong Kong harbour, and other things like charting, navigation, pilotage, and a lot of other nautical and maritime related topics that people would find interesting. So do visit the Maritime Museum if you are in Hong Kong. With that, I would like to end this video requesting you again to share this message far and wide. Thank you.